Yeah, it's in Dutch though. I tried to translate
let's
it.
start the webinar.
Okay.
Okay.
That was a nice way to say
Oh,
shut up.
so we have to share email addresses so we can share some stuff.
Sure.
Kindly mute your audio. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the international webinar. I am Manju Rose Matthews, Head of the Department of Media Studies, Nagar College, Trivandrum. On behalf of the Principal, Dr. Jolie Jacob, and Manager, Reverend Dr. Tito Verghese, and the organizing team, Emil Abraham, Tara B, and Nino PK, welcome you once again. We have more than 1,300 participants, registrations coming in from across the world. People have joined us from Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Qatar, Zambia, Nigeria, Switzerland, Denmark, and United States. And from India, we have participants from Kashmir to Kanyakumari and Nagaland to Gujarat. Thank you for the immense support for the constructive journalism. If any of the participants have any questions, kindly type in the chat box so that the speakers will respond. Good morning to the distinguished speakers and participants from abroad. And a very good afternoon to all participants across the country. We are starting the international webinar on constructive journalism, a response to sensationalism and negativity in media. Organized by the Department of Media Studies and Quality Assurance Cell of Nagar College, Maranallur, Trivandrum, Kerala, India. Constructive journalism is a solutions-focused approach to news beyond sensationalism, negativity, and bias. They explain what is going right, which is essential in a democratic society. For this webinar, we have world's best thought leaders in constructive journalism. Our first speaker is Ulrich Hagerup, founder and CEO of Constructive Institute, joins us from Aarhus University, Denmark. He was the executive director of news at Danish Broadcasting Corporation. Ulrich is the John S. Knight Fellow of Stanford University. He has also done his education in Wharton Business School and in.The. In 2008, he was the member of World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on the Future of Journalism, an award-winning journalist and an international public speaker on leadership and strategy. He is the author of many books on media. He will give us an insight into constructive journalism and its relevance. The title of the presentation is Let's Make Journalism Great Again. Why a good story is not a bad story. Now, Ulrich Hagerup will present. Thank you.
Hi, and good morning. Yeah, it's morning here, everyone. I'm pleased to be here. Let me tell you about my my own start as a journalist. And I don't know about you, I know there are a lot of students around. And some of you can still remember why you decided not to become a lawyer, to be rich, but you decided, despite everything, that you wanted to be a journalist. And why is that? I remember exactly why I wanted to become a journalist. I wanted to do good for society. I wanted to tell important stories to people so they could make up their own mind about issues. And at the same time, I could have the fortune to ask anyone any question all the time, because I asked on behalf of other people, and then I could have a great life, I assumed. So I wanted to do good. The reason why I'm sitting here is, and the reason why I quit my job as news director after 10 years at the Danish Public Broadcasting, running a newsroom of 500 people, was that I was suddenly realizing that maybe I wasn't only doing good for society, and maybe journalism was not only doing good for society. Maybe along the way there was something wrong, and I will try to let you into what I mean about that. And I will now show you some of these slides. And don't worry, there are a lot of them, but I'm fast. So this is the beautiful logo of Constructive Institute with a nice picture of something from your country in India. What we're talking about today is becoming a new megatrend in media. The idea that journalism can do more than just uncover things that are wrong. That's also the job of journalism. We shouldn't stop doing that. Keeping people with power to account, being the fourth estate, being the watchdog. We should never stop doing that. But could we think about that we also have another role in society, bridge building in society? We have to understand that more than any other profession, journalism is a filter between reality and the perception of reality. And why is that important to understand? Because perception is reality. People, everybody, you and me, we make decisions in our lives not based on facts, but on what we perceive to be the facts. Not only when we vote, but when we buy, when we make any kind of decisions of career, where we want to move, where we go on holiday, it's based on our assumptions about how the world is. And where do we get that from? We get it from what we see, and we get it from who we speak to personally. The rest is media. Yes, social media, but indeed traditional news filtered by people like you and me, journalists. And how do we do that then? A few more words about why perception is important to understand. I mean, take any supermarket chain in India. Their marketing strategy has nothing to do about being the cheapest. The most important thing for them is to make people in India think they have the lowest prices. Same thing in the media world. Slogans are important. There's still 40% of the American public who think that the slogan of Fox News is true, fair and balanced. I tell you, it's not. It's also in politics around the world. It's more and more based on slogans, which is targeted to change the perception we have about reality. In the Brexit debate in Great Britain, it was all about, we want our country back. I'm just asking, who stole it? But that's not important, as if you can build up the assumption that the Germans might have lost the Second World War, but now they are stealing Great Britain, then a lot of people, the majority of Brits, say, oh, we want to get out of that. We don't want that. We want Britain to be great again. So if you go to a website in India to see, oh, before you want to go there, how is it really in life in India? And you just check it and see it. And I just did last night just to see if you guys were safe in this very, very big country. You can see some of the headlines here, and I've just put a red dot, just scrolling down, a red circle around all the stories that were depressing, about killings, riots, things that did not work, something terrible. And the thing was, none of these stories were wrong. They were well written. They were probably also important. But my point is, this is the picture you get of India if you go to a news site in some of the media organizations that covers India for people in India, but also India for people outside India. It's like that. You think terrible, and you think the picture of India is somewhat like this, or people shooting each other and people are starving on the streets, everything is terrible. So is this a fair and accurate picture we get in our minds about India? Or are there more nuances to it? Is this also India? But we have a tendency in journalism to think that we get attention from the public by pointing people's shoulders, saying, you have to watch here because something's very dangerous here, and there was a tree falling down in Indonesia, and a suicide bomb in Syria, and this is also bad. I have a good friend. He is an editor of The Guardian in London, and he's saying news journalism has become the art of finding clouds on a sunny day. Like an old man in the pub grumbling about how the world has gone to hell. I avoid those people, and that's what our audiences are doing too. You could also see, especially on TV, all over the world, that we use terms from warfare when we name our debate formats, where we invite people into the homes and they should address issues of importance for society and people, but we call it hard talk, or we call it crossfire, or we call it duel. We do political debates like a boxing ring. This was an example from a Danish commercial TV2, but state-owned, and they ran an election campaign in a sports arena, in a boxing ring, where with half-naked women and disco music and smoke, and every politician, and this is the present prime minister, and they all only had to speak for 30 seconds, or the very famous Danish news anchor would hit a bell to interrupt them, because political debate should be about being rude and loud and short. And if we frame a political debate as boxing, then politics will be like boxing. Where did this start? I wanted to be a journalist because I wanted to do good, but then I went into journalism school, and there the culture started. I looked up at the teacher and he told me a good story is a bad story. If nobody gets mad, it's not journalism, but advertising. And it looked cool. It sounded great. I wrote it, we all wrote it down because, oh, that's what journalism was. And he was quoting great editors around the world. Before interviewing any politician, ask yourself, why is this bastard lying to you? So we wrote that down. Where did it come from? This idea that a good story is a bad story. Back when the Reuters Bureau, the news bureau of Great Britain, was founded in 1883, Mr. P.J. Reuter, he wrote to all these people around the world whom he wanted to pay for stories that he could resell to media companies. So what did he want from people to tell him so he could make money on it? It was like this: please cover the following. I mean, it was not a real email by then, but the wording is right. Please cover the following: fires, explosions, floods, inundation, railway accident, destructive storms, earthquakes, shipwrecks, attended with loss of lives, accidents to walkways. I don't want to read anymore, but you can see it yourself. This is news. This is what we have been told generation after generation, that is newsworthy. And what does it do to people? I still, when I do talks for journalism schools around the world, some of these students still to this day say, hey, we learned that the goal of journalism is to be critical, and we have to angle any story on a conflict in order to pass our exams. I'll let you in on a secret. The goal of journalism is not to be critical. Being critical is the most important tool in order to do good journalism, but it's not the goal. The goal of journalism is to make people smarter about themselves, other people, and their place in the world in order for them to make up their own mind. And in order to do so, journalists have to ask critical questions, not believe anything people say, but document it. Ask, is it true? Can I see? But when you have done that, then you should write about the facts, how the world is. And the idea of angling any story on a conflict, that's wrong. But our instinct is the moment we have somebody saying something, a new idea, we immediately try to find somebody who could shoot it down, because then we have a story. Is it really so that our profession all around the world, in your country as in mine, we journalists, we focus our attention and also due to that, the attention of the public to things that are extreme. And we do it to such an extent that the extreme becomes normality. Terrorists know exactly what they are doing. All over the world, they do terrorism. And their main weapon in doing so, scaring people. They do violent stuff to draw the attention of journalists and news media, so we can help them spread the fear. They know exactly what they are doing, and we are the best handgun for terrorists all around the world. Donald Trump is a good example of a politician who knows exactly what he's doing. He's talking into the real news criteria of news media, not only in the United States, but all over the world, getting free media coverage at the time when in the presidential election, in a few months, in the beginning of 2016, when he was not big at all, he got more media exposure than any of the other candidates together. Why? Because he was a freak show, because he talked into the criteria of American news and news organizations all over the world. He generated drama, he generated conflict, and he divided everybody into crooks and victims, the crooks being the Muslims and Mexicans, and the victims are the losers of globalization. Vote for me, let's build a wall, and let's make America great again. Britain, same thing. This guy, former journalist who was fired by the Times of London because he lied, now he's sitting in Downing Street number 10 because he was extremely good to talk into the news criteria. He was entertaining, he was fun, he was he generated something dramatic, and he generated conflict, and he won the election because he was very funny, he was a freak show, and now he runs Great Britain in a deep crisis. This thing about the getting back to the difference between reality and the public perception of reality, look at this, a giant survey made by Ipsos Mori. Look at, for instance, France, asking people, how many people are Muslim in your country? And the real number when they asked was around 8% of the French population. But that doesn't matter if people all over France, in average, think that almost 1 out of 3 people in France are now Muslim. And if the only people you know in France of being Muslim are people in television and online killing the rest of us and shooting Charlie Hebdo and being extremists and terrorists, who will you vote for in a French election? Would you welcome your neighbor if he looks like he is a Muslim? And again here, another question. The sense of economy. Before Corona, there was a huge unemployment rate in Italy, 12%, which is very high for Europe. But the stupid Italians with very, very bad media infected by Silvio Berlusconi in both the private and public sector think that almost half of the population in Italy are without work. If you think that half of your countrymen kind of find a decent work, you have lost all faith in democracy and in the system and in politicians. So in Italy, when any comedian runs For parliament, people will vote for them because they are not like the rest of them. And then they also disappoint, and then they should take them away. So perception is reality. When Donald Trump got elected in November 16, the unemployment rate in the United States was 4.9%, the lowest in 9 years. The economy was booming at that time, but that didn't matter because they thought, Republicans and Democrats alike, thought their perception was that the unemployment rate was 32. If you think that 1 out of 3 are without job, will you vote for the presidential candidate saying, I want to do exactly the same as my husband besides the intern part? Or will you vote for the guy saying, everything sucks, everything is falling apart, the Mexican is taking our job, let's build a wall? Who will you vote for? Perception is reality. This is a story which is really scary. It was a story written by the Washington Post last year, talking about a giant fitness chain in the United States, banning the use of news in the fitness chains all of the United States, out of the argument it doesn't relate to a healthy lifestyle to watch news. Most of us, we have the idea, especially the older of us, we have the idea that the following news is the essence of being a decent citizen. How can you be part of society if you don't know what's going on? You have to follow news. But now, all over the world, it has become socially acceptable to say, I don't want to follow news anymore. I get depressed. Look at this one. Reuters Institute at Oxford has done a giant survey about news avoiders, people who don't want to follow news anymore. Why? 48% say it's because I get depressed. Number 2, I don't trust it. And number 3, there's nothing I can do about it anyway. In the United States, we have news deserts. This is a Danish word for it. News deserts are giant areas, big cities with millions of people where there's not one journalist left to cover what's going on for the rest of the people there because people don't want to pay for it anymore. So the Americans also say, if you do what you always have done, you probably get the results you always gotten. So if you don't like the results, you might rethink. The problem is not that the numbers are wrong in the news. It's not fake news. The problem is that the picture gets wrong, says this guy who's a media analyst international and looking into content, saying negativity is an illness called by even serious newspapers, magazine, and not at least news broadcasters all over the world. And the thing is, the world is not falling apart, not even during the corona, which is very serious. But this guy, Steven Pinker, who's a professor of Harvard, say journalists report plane crashes, not planes that take off. As long as bad things have not vanished from the earth altogether, there will always be enough of them to fill the news. And people will believe, as they have for centuries, that the world is falling apart. That leads to populism. That leads to polarization. That leads to mistrust in the democratic institution and also in our profession. This is a Danish survey, but you probably also have in your countries about trust in different professions. You know where we are? We're down here between real estate agents and car dealers. Only politicians are lower, and they are lower because the way we cover politics. What's the power and responsibility of storytelling? We have to ask ourselves important questions now. The most important is, what is journalism? Carl Bernstein, who did the Watergate with Bob Woodward, said, journalism is not stenography, it's the best obtainable version of the truth. I like that, the best obtainable version of the truth. But do we do that? Do we give people that? Not really, because we are now, especially in the digital age, newsrooms all over the world engage themselves in an attention war. And we do it with a strategy, which say we need to give people more, need to be louder. We need to have more breaking, sharper headlines, faster deadlines on more and more platforms. And we do it with fewer people and less money. If you were any McKinsey consultant, you wouldn't really call this a winning strategy. And I trust you, it is not. I want to show you this. This is a video made by a woman in Great Britain who was a news consumer. And she had the habit of getting up at night when she was depressed of stupid boyfriends or whatever. And at some point, she was so tired of the British press, said she got up at night, wrote a poem, showed it to her boyfriend in the morning, and he said, Jesus, that's long. But then they put music under it and put it on YouTube, and they sent it to me because they heard that I shared her frustration, and I was even responsible as a news person. And listen to her voice. This is the voice of a news consumer.
The purpose of the news is to engage and inform, empower people to bring about reform, but their words are being lost by the noise of the storm. We hear about disaster, murder, conflict, and violence, and after a while this becomes white noise like silence. Because when there's a bias for the negative, we lose becoming sensitive, and instead we become emotionally dead. You see, this negativity has been shown to be destructively informing me, dividing me from society by creating this fear and anxiety. For many, they watch helplessly as if we're damned to be. But that's not the only story of the fate of our humanity. Let's hear about progress, acknowledge solutions. This excess of negativity, it's like mental pollution. When we do see good news, it's misrepresented. We hear cats being saved from trees and the conversation is ended, saved instead for an "and finally." But finally, these stories of possibility are being shown to be a vital story for society. We need to learn about how problems are being solved, issues resolved, for the sake of our souls. Not for ignorant bliss, but because we are better than this. We don't need sugarcoating or positive spins. Again, that's a cynical view that this conversation underpins. And don't get it confused with entertainment, PR, or fluff. Enough is enough. It's rigorous journalism reporting on progress, reporting on problems, but not ignoring success. We publicize failure, corruption, and shame, but when it comes to human potential, it's not treated the same, and the hypocrisy is killing me. Are you kidding me? They point the finger at every other industry, but leave them be. As this excess of negativity increases in velocity, atrocity, chasing more controversy. But where is the nobility in preying on morbid curiosity? I feel cheated, defeated by newspapers' allegiance to profits and clickbaits, regardless of if it generates hate and drums up the nation into a fearful state. Some people find it too much to take. And then the stories become lost because people switch off. But if we want a nation that's engaged and informed, it's time to reform. Make a new norm, empower, inspire, help us achieve higher. Report the good in other people, not just replay their evil. If we witness the unbelievable, it makes it more achievable. A solution seems more feasible. The only option now is to freeze or fall. After all, the truth of the world includes the good and the bad, the happy and the sad. So why would you just tell one half of the story? It leaves us in mourning, unable to see that the new day is dawning. The power lies in us becoming aware, to ensure they take more care about the stories they tell when they look at the world out there. And why should we care? Because the truth is, the news is an organization that's intrusive of our minds, and it's a matter of time before their words become our thoughts, shaping our opinions more and more. So what we're asking for, as I've said before, is rigorous journalism reporting on progress, reporting on problems, but not ignoring success. It may sound idealistic, it's been labeled naive, but let me assure you, this is not an ignorant plea. The research says it's obvious, and to ignore it is preposterous. So it's time for the consumers to take a stand, because the industry will listen to us.
So that's why we have introduced the term constructive news. And if you think she is right, then you can be part of changing this. This is a mindset change of journalism. It's not a religion. There's no Bible. You don't, and we don't have all the answers. But it's not North Korean version of journalism where you ignore problems. But it's a new word. It's a vocabulary. Just like investigative reporting that was invented because we needed to talk about how we can control power better because we didn't do good enough job in the 70s and 80s. So we talked about that. This is the same thing. We can talk about quality and better, whatever, but how better? We need to be more constructive. And that's why I invented the word constructive. What does it mean? It meaning having or intended to have a useful or beneficial purpose. Isn't that the idea of journalism? It's trying to counter the notion in the news industry, the culture that if it bleeds, it leads. It's trying to fight the one-sided journalism, where we only look at the world with one eye that confirms the picture we have already. So we have so we can angle either on the white or most likely on the black. It is insisting that journalists leave their attitudes behind at home, the prejudice, and go to work being curious, seeing the world with both eyes. Thinking that journalism is a feedback mechanism that should help society self-correct, uncover problems in order to have a debate about how to fix it, without us deciding how society should change, because that's the job of activists and politicians. But words matters, our words matters. And that's why we need to think carefully on how we filter the world for people. You can do it like the Daily Mail in Britain, and the same day the Daily Mail in Ireland, who did the same story in this way. Two very, very different approaches and ways of perceiving the world. That's why we built Constructive Institute, based at Aarhus University in Denmark. Our goal is to change the global news culture, and we want to do it in 5 years. We have 2 left. We want to reinstall trust in journalism and help news to become more meaningful. We work in 3 ways: new knowledge, new inspiration, and a fellowship program for great reporters and editors from around the world, bring them here so they can suck out knowledge from the university and think about how can they come back with new energy, new concepts, new ideas for constructive journalism in their newsrooms. We are powered by philanthropy, and we have partners all around the world, from Google to small startups to United Nations, Van IFRA, IMS, and journalism schools. And also in India, journalism schools are very welcome to partner up if you want. We need to think about the stool of journalism needs all 3 legs in order not to fall. And our stool only have 2 legs in journalism. We need to have 3, and let me get into that. Here are the 3 legs, and the 2 I was only taught about the first 2. It was not called breaking news when I was young, but now it's called breaking news. The same thing, it's about now. And the goal is speed. We ask questions like what and when. The style is dramatic, and we are like a police car rolling out to the accidents, and we angle on the conflict and the drama. Investigative news builds on top of that and is very important for society. But what is it actually? It's always about yesterday. Think about it. It's always trying to blame someone. Who did it? Why did it happen? We're critical. We play the role of a judge or a prosecutor, and we angle on the crook and the victim. If that's how we filter the world, and you agree that journalists really are the filter between reality and the public perception of reality, we'll be talking about things that has just happened right now and things that happened yesterday. But what about politics? What about societal debates? What's that about? It's always about tomorrow, but that doesn't really fit into our news criteria if we only have 2 legs on the stool. We need to add the 3rd leg, and that's called constructive journalism, insisting that journalism can also be about tomorrow. It can also inspire. It can ask the questions none of us, at least me, I was not told in journalism school that the questions now what and how are important, but they are because they point to the future. We have to be curious. We have to facilitate debates about what can we do about the problems we also have just uncovered. And we angle on the potential solutions and best practice. And no, this is not a contradiction to investigative reporting. It builds on it. It finishes the circle of investigative journalism, says this guy, David Boardman. He is a wise guy. He introduced investigative journalism in Europe 15, 20 years ago. When we talk about constructive journalism, we talk about 3 pillars of it. We call it journalism for tomorrow, and the ambition is to contribute to democracy through critical and constructive journalism in 3 ways. 1, focus on solutions. 2, cover nuances. And 3, promote democratic conversation. How did we do that? 3 examples. In the corona crisis, a good story can be a good story. For instance, the story from South Korea, where they had the problem they needed to test a lot of people very fast in a safe way. So they got an idea. Why not use McDrive from McDonald's? The idea that people use their cars to be tested. And that idea has spread through news to basically all over the world. This is a standard in which a lot of people are getting tested for COVID-19. Number two, when we cover the corona crisis, if we only count the dead and never tell people about people who got cured and give that just a bigger headline, how many people have been infected in India so far? What is 10,000? And how many are you? 1.2 billion? I'm not saying this is not serious. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do anything. I'm just saying 600 people have died in Denmark. Out of them, less than 50 did not have a disease that would kill them anyway. And out of the 50, most of them were heavy overweight. I'm not saying that's not bad. I'm just saying the nuances are very important for people. And if we only do the stories about people who die and don't tell the stories about people who were not infected and who recovered, then people get a wrong picture of the world, and that's not the purpose of journalism. And the third one, engage people. Some of the newsrooms we're working with, they have put all the emphasis on trying to answer the questions people have in the corona crisis, being the bridge between the public and experts and decision makers. And it works wonders. This is a mega trend in news. Constructive journalism answers the question of why public media quality journalism matters to society. It gives our news a clear purpose, they say at the umbrella organizations for public media in Geneva. And yes, it does work. One example, take The Guardian. They did it for 18 months digitally, and then they counted. What they found was people read constructive stories more than stories about suicide bombs and bad weather. They spend more time on it. The truth is, people don't read news stories to the end. They do that with stories about people who do something the rest of us might learn from. And they share them more on social media. Now the editor-in-chief, the great Catherine Weiner, says, we will now develop ideas that help improve the world, not just critique it like we did before. Despair is just another form of denial, and people long to feel hopeful again. Especially young people yearn to feel the hope that previous generations once had. We in the news business, we are depriving new generations hope, and that's the worst thing we can do. We need to understand that people don't need more information. They need navigation. They don't need more news, they need better. A navigation system, the value of that is not that it only tells you where you are, where you come from. The value is that it is updated, trusted, and tell you if you take a left turn up here, there will be a queue. If you go straight, it will take you 7 minutes longer. If you go left here, you will cut 5 minutes off the road. So the value of a GPS system is that it looks forward for you. That is the job of journalism as well. Not only looking at where we are, where we come from, but also pointing and helping people to navigate in their life, not decide for them where to turn and where to go, but help them make better decisions in their own lives. This kind of thinking is spreading around the world now, from Denmark to the Scandinavian countries, to local, national, regional media. ABC News in Australia last week announced they are now applying constructive journalism in their strategy after a workshop we had in Sydney in March, just before Corona. And this is spreading. And let me end with this one. Maria Popova, who's a Bulgarian-American YouTube philosopher. I didn't know you could be that, but she is. And she says something very interesting. She said, hope without critical thinking is naive, but critical thinking without hope is cynical. This is Bob the Builder. Obama stole his slogan, yes, we can. We can no longer wait for somebody to do something about this somewhere at some time. You and me, we have to be the change we're waiting for. Thank you very much. Can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Thank you, Ulrich Hagerup, for the great insight and taking us through the need of constructive journalism and the initiatives of Constructive Institute. And our participants have some questions. Our moderator will be asking the questions. Hope you can answer.
Sure.
Hello, Mr. Ulrich.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Neenu, and I'll be moderating the question answer session.
Sure.
So shall we begin?
Sure.
Okay, so the first question is by Aparajita Nair. She asked, Islamophobia is on the rise. We must understand that generalizing is bad for the society. What is your view? Sorry, what in your view could change this? That's the question.
And was the question that she thinks that journalism is bad for society?
No. She asked, Islamophobia is on rise and generalizing this issue is bad for the society. So what is your view on that?
I think we have, I mean, if you agree with me that our job is to give a fair and accurate picture of the world, we have in any issue also talking about people with another culture, another background than our own. We have to do two things. We have to deal with the problems, and we also have to deal with the normality. We have to, we shouldn't ignore problems. We should ask critical questions. Also to people who don't want to integrate, who do something strange, who want to change our culture in the way we have been living. But at the same time, you also have to be open for the good stuff. And you have to look into the values we're building our societies for: tolerance, freedom of speech, and people being allowed to practice their religion. So we should not use our own prejudice to cover any issue, and especially not issues of gender and culture and ethnicity and religion.
Okay, so I guess Aparajita is satisfied with the answer. So we'll move on to the next question. It's by Tanya Augustine George Morris. She asked, how can we decipher the objective truth in media, which is entangled in a dozen half-truths in the post-truth era?
That was a very philosophical question, but a good one. I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that nobody can be objective. That truth has led to some people say, then because we can't be that, then the purpose of journalism is to be subjective. And we should decide in our news organization or personally, who am I in favor of? I will then present the people I care about. I will present them in a good light, and the enemies will be presented in a bad way. You see in the United States what's going on right now. Fox News is showing the world in such a way that there's no Democrat who has ever thought anything decent. But the consequence of that is not that now CNN and NBC, they are doing the exact opposite. If you watch them and their part of the world, no Republican has ever done anything good for the world. And none of those truths are right, but they are just polarizing the way they cover it, and that's why they're polarizing the United States. So because you can't be objective, the idea of a professional journalist is really be aware of your own biases and really try to leave them behind, try to be open-minded when you ask people, go out and be curious and be critical also about your own assumption about the world. I think that's the only way. Try to give people the best obtainable version of the truth. I think that's the only way if we want people to trust us, if we want to be the glue in society, we need to find that professional place to stand. And we are losing that in many areas where journalists and news organizations really take stands on being left or right or blue or green or whatever. We should be on the side of truth.
Okay, so we will move on to the next question. This is from Pavitra Sukumar. And she asks, if journalism is the best of, if journalism is the best obtainable version of truth, why are people not believing in news nowadays? And why is there a crisis in the field of journalism? What is your take on that?
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, I think in order to be an authority, and society needs authorities, you have to know what you're talking about. A lot of people don't think we know what we're talking about. We might be on the spot, but we don't really know. We might go into an area and uncover it, but they don't really, if they know something about it already, they don't think we really know about it. That's one thing. We need to know more as journalists. We need to be better educated. We need to have time to research before we filter the world for people. And the other thing is, being authority means that you have to put the common good above your own self-interest. And more people don't think we do that as a profession. They think that we just try to find ways of making money on them. Or we try to persuade them to think the way we think. And that's not how you become an authority. So we have to think about our role. And that's also what constructive journalism tries to do.
Okay, sir, that's all for the question and answer session. Thank you so much. And I'll lead the rest of the session with Manju ma'am. Okay,
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the interactive session. And I hope the participants are very happy for this. And great to know that Denmark is adopting in a very and why Denmark is the happy country in the world. Good wishes for your global initiatives for making this world a happier place, and hope to have more sessions and training partnering with the Constructive Institute Denmark. Thank you. Thank you once again, Ulrich. So now it's a great privilege to introduce Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram, a widely read author, politician, and former international civil servant. Shashi Tharoor straddles several worlds of experiences. Third-term Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram. He is former Union Minister of State for HRD, External Affairs, and former Under-Secretary General for Communications and Public Information, United Nations. Dr. Tharoor was educated in India and the United States, completing his PhD in 1978 at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Dr. Tharoor is an ardent bibliophile, is also an award winner author of 18 books, both fiction as well as non-fiction, winner of Commonwealth Writers' Prize 1991 and other literary and journalistic awards. Pravasi Bharatiya Samman 2004, named Global Leader of Tomorrow at World Economic Forum, Davos, Switzerland, 1998. Awarded Robert B. Stewart Prize for the Best Student, the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University. An honorary D.Litt from the University of Pakistan and doctorate from the University of Bucharest. As Dr. Tharu couldn't join us live, he has provided us a pre-recorded video. He is in a meeting now. Dr. Tharu shall speak about constructive journalism and its relevance in India. The time is now.
I'm delighted to know that the Department of Media Studies at Nagar College is conducting a seminar by video conference on constructive journalism, and that too with a distinguished speaker in Charles Goodhuizen from the Netherlands. Constructive journalism is an idea whose time has come. We in India have been used, unfortunately, to a very different kind of journalism, where breaking news is all, it doesn't matter what reputations are broken, what heads are broken in the process, where the constant quest for sensational headlines, for more and more eyeballs to be grabbed amongst an ever-diminishing viewer pool, has resulted in a sort of televisual voyeurism of the worst kind. While the print media is relatively exempt from this failing, it is still true that most journalism is about bad news. The old cliche that dog bites man is not news, man bites dog is news, and therefore the unusual, the bizarre, the weird, the abnormal is what makes all the headlines, makes all the stories. And in the process, constructive stories, stories that look at the positive side of issues, stories that look at solutions to problems, stories that look at the efforts of ordinary people to deal with the calamitous challenges of daily life. Such stories tend to get neglected and left behind. I hope that in this discussion, all of the bright students of the Department of Media Studies at Nagar will in fact be exposed to new ideas and new ways of thinking, which will in turn inform their career as constructive journalists. Good luck and wish you a very successful seminar. Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for the message. As Dr. Tharoor said, journalism of positivity is more important to India than ever. Our next presentation is from Charles Groensen. Charles is a seasoned journalist with a great international experience as a foreign correspondent. Now, based in Netherlands, he is a speaker, author, panelist, and talk show host popularizing new thought in journalism, a journalism of optimism, focusing on strength, resilience, and solutions. The breaking news and sensationalism in media have limited its prime purpose in a democracy. Charles believes that journalism must equip readers or audiences respond to well-researched information and accurate portrayal of reality with solutions and insight. He is author of 11 books. In October 2019, he published a book about the upcoming US elections. Everything passes, even Donald Trump. In 2017, he wrote a book titled Optimism Rules the World. He has also co-authored a textbook on television journalism, Live. Charles Grandson is an experienced and sought-after moderator and public speaker on subjects ranging from international economic developments and new technology to sustainability and television journalism. His presentation is titled, "An optimist sees the donut, a pessimist sees the whole." Welcome, Charles.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good to see you all. Thanks for having me. It's an honor and privilege to talk to you today. Yes, I want to talk to you about optimism, not so much about pessimism. And I try to convey my message after, and I'll share the screen with you so I can show you some pictures. Let's see if this works. There we go. I've been in journalism for 45 years. I started out working for a newspaper way back. And I've worked for Dutch television since 1984. I've worked for public television all the time, and I've been for a long time the correspondent in the United States. One of my interviews was with this gentleman around 1988, Ronald Reagan. And this gave me, it's nice to have a picture like this. Best wishes, Ronald Reagan. And it's true, right now I'm still doing some TV work. I'm one of the anchors of a daily talk show around 10:15 on the biggest Dutch public channel, and I'm truly enjoying myself. And a book about optimism. I also did a theater show, and it's true, I did 11 books, and this was my last one. Actually, I'm rewriting it as we speak. In Dutch, it is everything passes, even Donald Trump. I'm not going to talk too much about Donald Trump. I'm going to touch on some other issues. Yes, I've been in journalism for a long time. You see some press passes from the past here. And I've been, again, a US correspondent for a long time. This is a Reagan-Gorbachev summit I think in Reykjavik. This is my press pass for the US Congress. Another one is here, let's see if I can do this. Here we go. Another one was the Gorbachev-Reagan summit in the United States. And yes, the basis of my message is optimism. Ulrich was talking about, positive journalism, constructive journalism, and I'm saying optimism or pessimism is also a choice. It is a choice to be optimistic about the future or pessimistic, because that determines your vision on the world around you. And yes, I use this quote. Nobody knows exactly who came up with this quote. Some say Oscar Wilde, but we're not totally sure, but that's not very important. This is the quote: "An optimist sees a donut, a pessimist sees the whole." And actually, I was writing this book about optimism, and I talked to my publisher and he said, "How long is it going to be?" I said, "About 80,000 words, 80,000. And then it came up with this quote, which is 10 words, and basically is the core of the message. So you can say it in 10 words or in 80,000 words. And I did both a little bit. And sees a donut, the pessimist sees. Although somebody sent me an email after one of my theater shows, Charles, you're probably right, but you do have to realize the whole is the most healthy part of the donut, and the donut itself is not very healthy. Well, that's true too. 45 years of journalism, in which I've lived in the world of good news is no news. That's what Ulrich talked about extensively, and I totally agree with him. But there are some political leaders who do focus on optimism, who do focus on things that are going well. Let me give you a quote by Barack Obama. And as you can see with the flags in the background, this was back then when he was still president, and you see the EU flag in the back. Yes, he was on one of his trips to Europe. And he talks about optimism. He talks about how the world is actually doing. And he says, in a lot of ways, the world is a better place than ever before. Let's listen. That's a powerful message, I think. He says we are wealthier, we are healthier, we're living longer, we're better educated, and finally, there are no more great wars anymore. But people barely realize all this progress. One more quote, this time by Bill Gates, and he's wondering, why are people not seeing all this progress? And he regrets it, Bill Gates. Progress is going faster than any time in history. And I think Bill Gates is right. And I want to show you a few graphs because they represent data. And data are the basis for either optimism or pessimism. And one of my favorite websites in this field is Our World in Data. And what you see here is data about extreme poverty going down, basic education going up. This is about the last 200 years. Imagine. This is about literacy, democracy, top right, vaccination, and child mortality. On each and every one of these graphs, you see progress, not just a little bit progress, you see tremendous, incredible.
Kindly share the screen. Kindly share the screen.
Are you talking to me?
A screen, slide share.
Oh, we have to. I'm not sure what you want to say to me.
No, it's fine. I can see you and the audio is clear. Only the screen sharing is not coming. That's what.
Screen sharing is not coming. I'll do it again.
Okay, it's fine. Continue. Now it's okay. Continue. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. So you do see the graph now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Good. So you see, let's start my presentation again here. Here we go. So it works again, just to be sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Wonderful. So 6 graphs and 6 times unprecedented progress over 200 years. Let's take, for example, vaccination. That increased tremendously. We have a huge problem with COVID or Corona, whatever you want to call it. But you see the progress here. Let me focus on 2. Extreme poverty. In your part of the world, you know a little bit about poverty. You know a little bit about natural disasters. This is the picture, last 200 years, extreme poverty. And some people will probably say, you know what, with the Corona crisis, extreme poverty will probably go up again. And I think you're right. It will go up a little bit. But if you look at this graph, the last 200 years, we've been through wars, we've been through natural disasters, we've been through pandemics, and the progress does not stop. On the contrary, the progress continues. If you look at this graph, and again, I would strongly recommend Our World in Data. You can look up the most terrific information about basically any subject. Let me give you one more. This is democracy, political regimes. Top left, you see that the purple part, that's countries living in a colonial regime. Well, you know a little bit about living in being a colony, right? That stopped. Switch to bottom right, the green part, that's the number of countries that are democratic right now. That's unprecedented. That has never, ever happened before. And yes, you do. Let's look around 1950. You see a dip. You see the number of democratic countries decrease. But right after 1945, end of World War II, you see the number of democracies increase. Yes, it's a bumpy road, and it will continue to be a bumpy road, but it's extremely hopeful, I think. One more. Again, Our World in Data, battle death, the number of people killed on the battlefield. I use this graph during all kinds of lectures all the time. I ask people, did you know this? Did you know that the number of people killed in wars decreased by 95%? And most people say, Charles, why don't we know this? Yeah, we don't know this because the media don't focus on numbers like this. They do focus on a war, and it's terrible. And every single person killed in the war is one too many. But you have to focus on this graph and see, yes, there's tremendous progress. One more, annual death from natural disasters. Again, very much also in your region and your part of the world, you see the decrease, again, 90% decrease in number of people killed by natural disasters. And again, every single person drowning or in a hurricane being killed or something is terrible. But these are the numbers, and they are more than encouraging. Again, the world has 100 people in the last 200 years. Unfortunately, most people don't know it. This is a quote by Max Roser, one of the people behind this Our World in Data website. And he says, more than 9 out of 10 people do not think that the world is getting better. How does that fit with the factual evidence? He's surprised, sometimes even stunned, about people not knowing about progress. And that's unfortunate, because not knowing about progress leads to potentially other political choices. Ulrich was talking briefly about Donald Trump. I'm not a friend of Donald Trump. He is focusing on the negative side. He's stressing the negative things in news and the negative things in people, at least the negative things that he sees. One more, also very much about your country, nuclear warheads. You're one of the nuclear powers after all. It starts in 1988. There were some 70,000 warheads in the world, and it's down to about 14,000. And again, when I ask an audience, did you know that? No, we didn't. And it's true. This happened since these years. Mikhail Gorbachev, Ronald Reagan, 1987, 1988. Actually, I covered these summits back then for Dutch television. And they said to each other, let's talk. And they did not just talk to talk, they walked to walk. They actually decreased the number of warheads. And yes, it's true. Right now, Donald Trump is canceling some of these weapons agreements with Russia. It was back then the Soviet Union, of course, but it doesn't really change the graph in a dramatic way. The decrease in nuclear warheads is continuing, and the increase in security in the world is increasing. Again, Max Roser, he says, failing media, the huge majority of people are completely ignorant about global development. That's a sad conclusion by this Max Roser, and I do agree with him, unfortunately. Let's talk about political leadership, because if we talk about optimism and pessimism, we have to realize it's a choice. It's a choice for us, for you, for me, and a choice for our political leaders. When I'm in front of an audience, I ask people, what were the great leaders of the last 70, 80 years? Really international leaders that inspire us, give us perspective. And I always get the same names: Gandhi, Churchill, Martin Luther King, Kennedy, Roosevelt, Mandela, and Angela Merkel. Let me go through them and listen to them, what they say about this choice between optimism and pessimism, what they say about the choice between confrontation and working together. And each and every one of them has been through huge challenges, huge problems, wars, violence, and all of them eventually choose for sticking out your hand and say, let's work together. Let's start with Mahatma Gandhi. He said, non-violence is mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of man. And he's so right. Winston Churchill, a little variation on the donut quotation. He says, a pessimist sees a difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees an opportunity in every difficulty. And his brother in arms in the Second World War, of course, one of them at least, was Franklin Roosevelt, the American president. And he lived through the crisis in the US, the New Deal and everything. And he ends up being an optimist. He says, we always have to believe, held to the belief that there is a better life, a better world beyond the horizon. And imagine, folks, that these two guys, Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, had decided in 1940 or 1941, they decided, you know what, this Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler, we can't beat the guy. We better work with him. We better come to an agreement with him. If they had chosen that pessimistic scenario back then, instead of the optimistic scenario saying, we can defeat Nazism and fascism, that's what their optimistic choice was. If they had done differently, your and my world would look differently right now. One more inspiring leader, for me at least, John Kennedy. He announced in 1961 that they started the Apollo project to bring a man to the moon, and eventually they succeeded in 1969. Neil Armstrong, we all know the pictures in there. And in that speech, he announced this Apollo project. The sentence after this announcement is even more interesting. He says, we don't do it because it's easy, we do it because it's hard. And that's so inspiring. Optimism, yes, we can, you know, the Barack Obama quote, we can do it, we can succeed in beating this challenge, technologically, politically as well. You need political support from both big parties, Republicans and Democrats, in order to do it. Of course, Nelson Mandela, the big example of the man who, you know, was beaten up, was imprisoned for the longest time in South Africa of apartheid way back. Was he angry? Was he frustrated? Was he revengeful? No. He said, if you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Isn't that inspiring? Those are lessons for the future. Those are lessons for each of us. You're living through a pandemic right now, in very different situations, because we all struggle with it in different ways, right? And he said, work together. And it's a quote actually used in an article I wrote about the big demonstrations about racism in the United States. And I really like this. He said, love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. Can somebody send this quote to Donald Trump, maybe? And there's another one. Thinking about progress when it comes to racism and racial relations in the United States and probably in your country as well. He said, if you cannot fly, run. If you cannot run, walk. If you cannot walk, crawl. But always keep moving forward. And I think that's an extremely powerful lesson to this day. Finally, Angela Merkel, who says democracy is the counter model to terrorism. A couple of years ago, Germany was in big trouble with huge influx of immigrants from the Middle East, from Northern Africa, and a lot of political turmoil about this influx of immigrants. A lot of people say, stop, you know, kick them out, you know, Donald Trump kind of way. And she said 3 words in German. She said, wir schaffen das, which means we'll manage, we can do this, we can succeed. And democracy is important, but I would like to suggest another one that's maybe at least as important as democracy. That's literacy. Look, folks, at this map. This represents the percentage of people who can read and write of 65 years and older. And that's low from Northern Africa to the Middle East. These are low percentages. Talking about progress, compare these numbers of the 65-year-olds and older to the younger generation. Isn't it amazing? There you see the 90%, 80%. That's an increase of 60, 70% compared to the older generation. That's where change is coming from eventually. This is, I think, an amazing and very encouraging number. So she says, Angela Merkel, democracy is the counter model to terrorism. Yes, you're right. But I would say maybe literacy is the model for real progress. And it goes through all the generations, the younger generation, the older generation, the bottom right, the real young generation, bottom left. There's really progress on the horizon. That leads me to my gallery of hope. But in order to see this progress, in order to be willing to be inspired by the messages of Gandhi, Churchill, King, Kennedy, Merkel, and to be willing to be inspired by these people, you have to look at the world around us in a way that brings you optimism and brings you the willingness to work with people. Watch and choose. You have to see the perspective. You have to see the dimension of progress. Look at this little clip. This is an unusual a kind of representation of the second dimension. It is actually 2 dimensions, but if you're really skillful in painting and, you know, with a scissor, you can do this. It adds a dimension to the truth. It looks, simple. And you see the picture, but it's different. Another one. I like street art. If you look at this street painting, you have no clue what you're looking at. And people are watching from the other side. Same here. You have no clue what you're looking at. But go to the other side, walk around it, and it's this. And this one I just showed you, walk around, walk to where the people are, and it looks like this. What I'm trying to say, folks, if you look at the world around you, if you think about your future and your children's future, try to come up with a creative way of thinking. Don't take the first thing you see for granted. Be creative, be inspired to look at it in a different way. If you walk on the street, wherever you are, and you see a bridge or a tunnel, you see a bridge or a tunnel, but some people, artists, street artists, say, oh my gosh, this is interesting. This is, yes, it's a bridge or a tunnel, but I can make something beautiful out of this bridge or tunnel. And then you get this. It inspires me because it shows you how you can really change your perspective and improve your appreciation for what's going on in the world by just looking at it in a different way. I actually like this parking lot. Would you park in that spot here in front? Probably not. And if you've seen this picture, you say to yourself, oh my gosh, what am I looking at? Is this fake or is it real? Well, you better pick your choice. Looking at facts can be, disturbing, can be confusing. We were just talking about Corona briefly. This is the number, again, our World in Data, number of people killed in India. And that looks quite disturbing. Let me add another country, Bangladesh, same thing. Let me add a few more countries, Malaysia and China. They seem to be doing better than Bangladesh and India. Let me add a few more countries. Again, Bangladesh and India, Malaysia, China, Nepal and Sri Lanka apparently are doing way better than the other countries. That looks like a pessimistic, bad story for India. That's the perspective. These are the numbers. I have to assume our World in Data, they do their work real thoroughly in a very scientific way. Because we have to assume that the numbers are correct. Well, let's add some more countries here. Let's add Pakistan and Afghanistan. And all of a sudden, India and Bangladesh are in the middle of the pack. So totally different perspective. Look at it in a different way. Try to be creative. Try to think, is this really the whole story? Another one is the United States. And this is my country, the Netherlands. We are pretty high up when it comes to the number of people killed per million people. All the way at the bottom, you see the countries in your region. That's different. It's totally different from the first graph I showed you, where India was really high when it came to the number of people killed. Sweden is even higher than also the Netherlands and the United States and the countries in your region. So it's really different. So this is India again, and this is Sweden on top. There you see the difference. So that makes a difference if you're willing and have the creativity to say to yourself, I'm seeing numbers, I'm seeing in the media a reality that's presented to me, but is that correct? Is that really the truth? One of the people I truly admire and has been working on this issue for a long time is this fellow, Hans Rosling, guy from Sweden. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. And he worked on perception. He worked on the way we look at the world. And these are his research assistants. Let me explain to you. He went to the zoo because he wanted to know what chimpanzees would pick when it comes to big questions about peace and war, about development, about hunger, about education. Because after he traveled the world, and Hans Rosling traveled the world, and he gave speeches at the IMF, World Bank, at big events all over the world. And he did a little survey among the people in the audience asking questions about how the world is doing. And it struck him that these people, decision makers, really smart, highly educated people, gave really poor answers. Their scores were horrible. And actually their scores were worse than the chimpanzees. And he was wondering, my gosh, how is it possible that these people are really, deciding about you and my future are scoring worse than the chimpanzees? Let's listen to him. He talks about these poor scores, and the media. So he talks about the media in a very, negative way, in the sense that he is negative about, the role of media in international perspective. And if his conclusions are, who knows more about the world, you or a chimp? And he says, yes, people are worse than the chimps. Are you smarter than an ape? Are you ignorant about the world? Yes, he says, the world isn't quite as awful as we think it is. And that's, I think, a very powerful and optimistic message by Hans Rosling. And his conclusion, there's devastating ignorance. And that is a terrible conclusion if you think about it, because there's more information available than ever before. We can just, with a click of a mouse or whatever, you can get any kind of information you need. And still there's devastating ignorance. And you probably know the term mindfulness, people who are looking for solutions in life and everything. And his book is called Factfulness. And he talks about 10 reasons we're wrong about the world and why things are better than you think. So yes, there's reason for optimism. And yes, there are politicians and political groups who do it in a totally different way. These are words, I do a lot of work on the United States and American politics. These are words I see a lot in the stuff I'm reading and I use when I do the writing. A liar, being arrogant, being stupid, being a buffoon, being an idiot. It goes on and on and on. And there was an interesting column by this gentleman, Arthur Brooks of the New York Times, and he said, when people have a hole in their life, they often fill it with angry politics. And I think Arthur Brooks was right. It makes you think. It's not just happening to you that you're pessimistic or angry or frustrated. In a way, it's also a choice. Ernest Hemingway, the famous, said, the best way to find out if you can trust somebody is trust them. I do know, and you do know, politicians who do it differently. Finally, one more quote by Barack Obama. He was wondering, where would I, at what time in history would I like to be born? What would be my preference to be born? This is what he said. And I think that's a powerful message. You would choose today. And don't ignore the problems, don't ignore the challenges, don't ignore the risks. They are there. But the perspective on life, the perspective on our future is according to the optimist sees the donut, the pessimist sees the hole. Let's look at the donut. Don't eat it, but at least look at the donut. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles Groensen, for your inspiring and informative talk. We hope to meet you again for more sessions. And now let's have an interactive session. Our moderator will present the questions from the participants and kindly answer it.
Sure, my pleasure.
Hello, Mr. Charles.
Hi there, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm fine. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Okay, so I'll be moderating the question answer session. My name is
Sure.
Neelu. Okay, so let's begin. So the first question is from Kaori, and this is from Japan. He wants to ask how to cover news when journalists are used as political tools.
That's always a risk, and you have to be aware of that risk all the time. And all I can say is, keep your eyes on the prize. Keep your eyes on the prize of truth. Keep your eyes on the prize of, fair and balanced reporting. If you're not able to distinguish between facts and fiction, yes, you are in trouble. If you're not able to distinguish between being an independent reporter, journalist, and being the tool in the hands of politicians, it is hard. The only thing I can say, keep the focus on facts as much as possible, and keep checking. Don't be, necessarily always suspicious. I talk a lot to politicians. From Parliament, I talk to members of the government, Prime Minister. I mean, I talk to them all in the talk show I'm doing. And I'm not the kind of guy who says, they're always lying, politicians. No, you have to work with them. They ask you critical questions, but try to do it as much fact-based as possible. That's crucial.
Okay, so the next question is from Dinesh Sharma. Why is journalism not trustworthy anymore? And which qualities are lacking behind in a good journalist?
What was the first part of the question, please?
Why is journalism not trustworthy anymore?
I'm not sure. Some people say it's, the horrible influence of fake news, for example. I don't buy that, actually. Yes, fake news is a problem, and some people, buy into it. But primarily, people are already inclined to believe that kind of stuff. What I think is, the trustworthiness of journalists has gone down more by, the way politicians treat journalists, Donald Trump being an example of it. On the other hand, in this day and age with Corona, with a lot of stuff going on in the United States and other parts of the world, we see, at least here in Holland, for example, circulation of newspapers, the better newspapers, is going up. I'm working for Dutch public radio and television. Our talk show is on public TV. The ratings are up. So people are truly interested in what's going on. So don't focus too much, would be my advice. Don't focus too much on the negative side and the fact that people don't trust media. There are a lot of people, we see it every day. We get a lot of people, writing us, calling us, saying, yes, we do appreciate the kind of work you do. So I think it's not as negative as people like to think. There is a difference, though. I write a lot about the United States. And it's true, if you look at surveys from the US, where it comes to the trustworthiness of American media, we here in Holland and in Western Europe in general, I'm not so sure about your part of the world, at least here in Europe, the trust in media is much higher than the trust in media, for example, in the United States. But the same goes for politics. If you ask Americans, do you trust members of Congress? Do you trust other politicians? The ratings and the numbers are much lower than here in Holland. We live, so far at least, of course, we have populist parties and anti-immigrant parties. Yes, we do. But at the same time, we are still, in Holland at least, and the same goes for Scandinavia, Germany, we live in a high trust society compared to a lot of other countries. And I would give a compliment to journalism, at least here in my part of the world. There's so many people really try to do the best they can, and from a lot of people, they do get trust. And those of the people here who don't trust us, too bad. We do it as best as we can.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Gayatri Nandakumar. Do you think there is a need to include constructive journalism as a separate subject in journalism education field?
Yeah, I do think it's very useful to do it separately in education, although you could argue that don't do it separately, try to integrate it in the whole curriculum. But as far as, we're not that far yet. Most journalism schools I know, some of them at least do talk about constructive journalism. Some of them have really, courses in constructive journalism. I think we're at a...
I'm sorry, sir, but your audio is not. We lost your audio. We have some technical trouble. We are extremely sorry, but
Okay.
we'll look in a minute. Yes, we got it. We got back the audio.
Okay, good. My recommendation will be, yes, try to do it separately with separate courses in journalism schools. Eventually, I would hope that we don't need it anymore. I would hope that it's going to be integrated in the regular curriculum. And more importantly, it's integrated in the thinking that, the way journalists operate. And it's like, it shouldn't be, sometimes you see on websites, little, segment with good news. That's bad. I would not recommend that, because then you have some kind of excuse to do the regular stuff and all the negative news and all the confrontational news. Oh, well, we have this little segment with positive news. That wouldn't be my approach. On the contrary, I would say try to do it as a part of your general reporting, and make it part of your thinking and the way you do your stories, and make it an integral part of it.
Okay. So the next question is from Morgan John Thompson. What is your take on Trump's recent executive order on online censorship? What strategy do you think will work to combat fake news without stripping the citizens of their right to speak?
The only thing you can do, you cannot, first of all, you cannot ignore fake news. You can really beat it, because it's so easy. You need a laptop, and that's all you need, and a lot of guts, and and probably lack of taste. The only thing you can do is, to fight untruth is come up with the truth. The only way to fight distrust is come up with reasons to trust you. Don't try to beat it. And I did quite a bit of research on fake news. And if you take the total amount of information that's coming towards us nowadays, and that's a lot, if you put it at 100%, all the information that we can just take in, and then look what percentage in those big column of 100% is actually fake news, then you would see that that's minimal. It's not a whole lot. They're loud and they grab attention. But if you look at the total numbers and statistics about fake news I've seen so far, are not very disturbing. It's 1, 2, 3% of the total. And again, they're loud and they grab your attention, and it's sensational and everything. But if I look at the situation here in Western Europe, in general, people do trust their regular media, and they do trust the mainstream media that some people say are not to be trusted. I disagree. And again, when you look at the total number of information that falls in a category of fake news, it's really limited.
Okay. So shall we go on to the next question?
Sure.
Okay. So this question is from Rhythm Chowdhury. He asks, most of the world follows democracy, but still, why do the government control most of the journalism in their country? Journalism should be free from all control and authoritarianism, isn't it? That's his question.
Yeah, that would be ideal. And again, I showed you a graph where you see that the number of people, a number of countries that fall in the category of democracies, and they're not always ideal and perfect democracies, no. But the number of people worldwide that do live in a democracy and do enjoy at least some kind of a free press is increasing rapidly. The last couple of years, we see a slight decrease, but if you look at it in the longer run, and I always tend to take a few steps back and say to myself, what's the long-term perspective here? What's the long-term development? I'm not so pessimistic, actually. In the longer run, I talked about literacy, right? look at the numbers in literacy in the Middle East, for example. In the Middle East, when it comes to the position of women, for example, I mean, there's a long way to go, to say the least. But looking at these numbers of literacy should give you hope and should make you realize never, ever before in history of that part of the world, for example, the increase of number of people who can read and write, the increase of emancipation of women, of also men and all kinds of other groups, is incredible and unprecedented, and a reason for hope, and I think a reason for optimism. Eventually, freedom wins.
Okay, so the next question is from Ananda Krishnan. Did political influence change journalism into a corrupted one?
The last part of this question, please.
Did political influence change journalism into a corrupted one?
In a corruptive way? Yeah. Because politicians are smart. And again, I live in a country where we have the luxury of a free press and on average, a high quality free press, but there's so many countries who don't have that luxury. We have to be honest and open about it. And yes, there are countries where politics is corrupted. There are many countries actually where journalists are put in jail when they talk freely about what's going on in the country and they criticize their governments and politicians. But also, Freedom House does great work in this field. If you look the longer term development, the number of countries with more freedom is increasing long term, and the number of countries with little freedom is decreasing. So again, that's a reason to be, at least hopeful about a better future eventually. And it's so important to realize that most of the developments we've discussed, Ulrich talked about it, I've been talking about it, when it comes to progress, are long term. They don't stop. That development about literacy, of the number of democracies, of child mortality, for example. Child mortality is a terrific example. And again, in your part of the world, of course it's an issue. And it's terrible, what still happens. But the number is decreasing of children dying before the age of 1 or 2 or 3. And that's a achievement that's unique. It has never happened before in history. I mean, right now, despite the trouble we go through with the pandemic and everything, and increasing poverty and increasing child mortality, maybe, I don't know, I don't have to see the very recent numbers. But despite all these challenges and, all these headwinds, we do make progress. It's like what Max Roser of Our World in Data says. It's stunning how big the ignorance among many people is about the progress in the world. And that's why we see the failing of media in general. And it probably applies to media here in Holland and in Europe and in your part of the world as well. Media fail to recognize, and media fail to actually pay attention to the things that could make people optimistic. Optimistic people are empowered. Pessimistic people are not empowered. They don't have the energy, they don't have the guts, they don't have the creativity to make their own lives better and to make the lives of other people better. You need optimism, you need empowerment, and media are crucial. The tone and the content of media is crucial when it comes to this kind of progress.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll move on to the last question. This is from Teresa Baby. The question is, what can a viewer or a media consumer do when the media houses deliberately avoid constructive journalism?
Last part of the question, sorry, I missed that one. What can I do?
What can a media consumer or a viewer do when a media house deliberately avoids constructive journalism?
Avoids constructive journalism.
Yeah, when they deliberately
you can't make them. You can't make them do it. Ulrich had some interesting numbers about news avoidance. And I know these numbers. There's a terrific project if you want to take it down. It's called Perils of Perception. Perils of Perception. I had to leave it out because I have to be short here. if you look at the numbers of perils of perception, that shows you the gap between what's actually happening in a country and what people perceive to be happening. For example, about numbers of Muslims or immigrants or pollution or whatever. I mean, people are always wrong on the pessimistic side. And if you add to this fact news avoidance, where Ulrich was talking about, that's staggering. The number of people who say, you know, media consumption makes me depressed. I don't like it anymore. I try to avoid day-to-day news. I try to avoid TV news, newspaper news. That's terrible. Imagine, you know, a supermarket chain in your country where about 30% of the people say, you know, those stores of these guys, they depress me. I don't want to go there. They depress me. That's horrible. That's a business model that's not survivable. So newspapers, TV stations, in my view, eventually have to adjust, have to change in the direction of more constructive journalism, simply because more and more people say, enough. Yes, we have to hear about pandemics or accidents or explosions or terrorist attacks. Yes, we do have to read about it and hear about it. But at the same time, more and more people will say, I would like to see a different, more nuanced approach to news that's actually more like the world around us than just the picture we get from the media. The picture of the media is too pessimistic, too negative, too confrontational, and does not really inspire and empower people.
Okay, sir. So that was the end of the question answer session. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And now I'll hand over to Manju ma'am.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for being with us for a wonderful interactive session. And thank you, Nino, for selecting very important questions that can change the perspective of the world regarding the positive journalism. And let us see all positive opportunity in journalism to build a healthy, happy society and transform lives with positive journalism. And thank you, Charles and Ulrich, for making these insightful presentations. And we hope to carry on the message of making more good news with good stories and inspiring the generations to be even more optimistic than ever. Department of Media Studies of Nagar College will host more sessions and advanced training programs in constructive journalism. Thank you all for being here. The feedback form for this webinar is being sent to your email IDs, and e-certificates for the webinar participation will be sent to all participants on receiving the feedback form. We are concluding this webinar. Thank you once again on behalf of Nagar College, Maranallu, Trivandrum. Thank you. We look forward to meet you in another session.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Charles. Meet you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.